After a big win from the Supreme Court earlier this week, it ended on a sour note for former President Donald Trump, with millions owed over different legal fees. Now, after he posted bond of nearly $92 million.
I still can't wrap my arms around that number.
Huge.
$92 million.
Yeah, that's for the E. Jean Carroll defamation verdict. And while the judge also orders him to pay $382,000 to a company he unsuccessfully sued in London, all while he has important hearings coming up as well.
All right, to discuss these astronomical numbers, let's welcome in former acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker. Attorney General, always great to see you. I'm going to jump right in. These fees, I mean, I can't even imagine this. These are not just hefty. These are massive, massive fines levied against Trump, especially the New York civil fraud case payment. Do you think that his legal team can keep their heads above water here?
Well, good morning, and it's good to be with you today. You know, I think the team is big. It's a big team. I mean, each case has a unique set of lawyers that are working on it. And the most fascinating issue for me is really this Eighth Amendment issue that's percolating up from the civil case in New York that Letitia James brought as a campaign promise and really a vindictive effort for her to push Donald Trump and his companies out of New York. But, you know, there are supposed to be no excessive fines and, you know, no cruel and unusual punishment. It's a constitutional right. It's our founding fathers knew this was a weapon used by the state to harm citizens that were out of favor. Well, you know, 250 years later almost, here we are with this same threat, because they, you know, the founding fathers understood one thing, and that was human nature. And so, you know, I think we'll see that in the Supreme Court soon of the United States. And I think ultimately that that almost $450 million fine now that Letitia James is celebrating the accrual of the interest on every day on Twitter, I think you'll see that ultimately be knocked substantially lower, if not eliminated, because, again, there was not a single victim in that case.
Yeah, Special Counsel Jack Smith is also urging Judge Eileen Cannon to reject Trump's efforts to dismiss the classified documents case in his hearing next week. Do you expect that there'll be any major bombshells there?
You know, that's a hard case to predict, because at the end of the day, you have this presidential records issue that's important, and the dismissal and the papers that have been filed with that motion to dismiss, I think, paint a fairly interesting legal question. And the legal question is not only this Presidential Records Act, but also whether or not the National Archives could even refer a criminal case to the Department of Justice under the statutory scheme. And so I think Judge Cannon is going to have an interesting decision to make. Ultimately, the 11th Circuit will look at that as well. And so that case is going to be slow probably to take off because of those issues, plus the you know, significant amount of classified information that they're dealing with.
All right, well, the Supreme Court justices will hear arguments on another Trump case on April 25th regarding Trump's immunity. So if the justices eventually rule in Trump's favor, what precedent will that set for the future? Because I do think that's important.
Well, every president needs, Michael, as you know, an ability to do their job without worrying about what future administrations will consider their decisions. And so presidential immunity is certainly a doctrine. And the question is it unlimited, or are there outer bounds to it? You know, President Trump has been adamant that, you know, presidents need unlimited immunity. And I think that that is, you know, we'll get close to that from the Supreme Court case, because they will say, you know, that anything the president does that's an official act certainly is covered by presidential immunity. And that's why I think, you know, the Trump team has been adamant about this issue and why the Supreme Court took up the case. I don't think it's going to be unanimous 9-0 like we saw in the Colorado case, but I think you could see case law solidify in this, because there's really no other example of this issue. The closest is a civil case involving former President Richard Nixon, but this case, I think, is much bigger than that case.
Yeah, Attorney General, let me just ask you very quickly, having worked for the federal government for almost 20 years myself, over 20 years, there was federal employees, usually it's about scope of employment. Now, I assume because he's president, that scope will be given a lot of latitude. It would be a very wide scope. Obviously, though, if he, something ridiculous like he came home and beat his wife because they had an argument, obviously that wouldn't be within the scope of his employment. So I see the Supreme Court really narrowing this down to saying, with a large degree of latitude, if it's within the scope of the employment of the president, then naturally he would be immune, and that would be in line really with the holdings of all federal employees to some extent.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Michael, and obviously the things that he's not immune for are things that he would never do, like the example you just gave or the example that the D.C. Circuit gave. I think in all these examples, it is going to be a scope of employment, but the President of the United States is always the president. There's never a moment where he's not president. We give him a house. He has, airplanes and helicopters. Because he is the president, he's uniquely the head of the executive branch. And so I think you're right. It will be an expansive view to the outer bounds of what officially the president is and isn't supposed to do and what is covered by immunity.
Attorney General, we have less than a minute left, but I just want to ask you about the timing of all these cases, because do you think that this is strategic? Is it quick scheduling to try and get some sort of sympathetic, is it a sign from these sympathetic judges here, or what do you make of the timing?
Well, the timing obviously is to try to get a criminal conviction against Donald Trump before the election. And, Jack Smith especially has been pushing for that. He has been frustrated by, the constitutional rights of the former president, which, is certainly something that Donald Trump is entitled to. I think you're going to see the Alvin Bragg case in New York, which is by far the weakest case, go to trial. And I'm not sure that at the end of the day that case is going to mean much to the American people, no matter the outcome.
Yeah.
Fair enough. We're going to have to leave it there. Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, our friend, we appreciate you being on this morning.
All right. Thank you. Good
very
to see you
much.
this morning.